We do this every day, so naturally, we're sensitive to quality of fuel issues. We're hearing from guys that their bikes are crapping out for no apparent reason. Yesterday it was running fine, and today it won't start. There must be something wrong with the carbs. Well, sometimes rarely, very rarely, when our carbs are involved, this is true. But a sudden change often points to something else. Once we've gone over the usual suspects, the final question is, when did you last fill up? If the answer is on the way home last night, then we might have a clue as to what might be going on. First, some science. Ethanol dissolves in both gasoline and water. Ethanol is also hydrophilic, meaning that it absorbs water. In fact, it has a higher affinity for water than it does for hydrocarbons, and this is where the trouble lies. It sucks water out of the air like a sponge. At small concentrations, it'll pass through, but when it approaches what we call the saturation point, the problems begin. More science. Warm ethanol holds more water, so the saturation point is higher. But when it cools off, it'll precipitate out and sink, where it accumulates into a layer of ethanol and water with little or no gas in it. This is known in the industry as phase separation. As you might predict, evidence is accumulating, which suggests that if you fill up soon after the tanker truck has left your favorite corner station, you've got a higher likelihood of putting gas into your tank that's going to start separating shortly. That is, if it already hasn't started to. So you make it home just fine. But overnight in the cold garage, high school chemistry kicks in, and in the morning, you're sucking water and ethanol into your engine. Let's take a step back and suppose that we're a refinery, and we're blending ethanol that's already at or near the saturation point. Not hard to do. The industry itself notes that ethanol can become saturated in 90 days, given warmth and humidity, such as what you'd find in the subtropical Gulf states where the majority of refineries are located. Get this, they have to leave headspace in the bins just to allow for it. Pardon me for being cynical, but let's further imagine that we deliberately add just a little water to stretch the supply. I know. Oil companies are notoriously ethical, but we're that one in a zillion who see a chance to grab just a bit of pure profit. And hey, nobody monitors water content anyway. So as long as we keep it warm, phase separation will be somebody else's problem. In doing this, we've primed our faithful customers for a calamity. And once again, true to what you'd predict, complaints nationwide are up sharply. And not just from motorcyclists, of complete engine failures that technicians are attributing to defective gas. Your Suburban needed new injectors and a fuel pump, lady. That'll be $1,700 bucks. Here's where it gets bizarre though. Every state has a weights and measures agency that's supposed to protect us consumers. There are even statutes that open the door to civil damages lawsuits against station owners who either deliberately water their supplies, this is actually the most common means of oversaturation, or who, through their own or others' negligence, fail to check for and pump out the phase-separated layer in their tanks. You'd think that courts all over the country would be filling up with aggrieved motorists. Well, the complaints are there all right, and you'd naturally assume that the oil companies and their vendors would put up a vigorous defense. It is the American thing to do, right? You'd also assume, or at least hope, that the weights and measures agencies would be on our side because we're being out and out ripped off. Well, think again. If anything, it's the other way around. For example, the Minnesota Department of Weights and Measures came to the rescue of a rural station owner who was suspected of watering his gas. Well, caught red-handed is more like it, but whatever. They argued that station owners are too honest for that, and their own testing didn't find a problem in samples they took from the tank in question, which sample, incidentally, was taken long afterward, and of course they warned him that they were going to test his gas. The fix was in, and it only gets worse. With the Midwest drought dragging into its third year, crop yield, and thus ethanol production, is so low that dozens of distilleries have either closed entirely or are on skeleton shifts seeing to repairs and such while waiting for the rains to come. Those in the know hasten to reassure us that they've got ample stockpiles, so we shouldn't fret about shortages. I'm so glad to have them watching my back. Seriously though, pray for rain. Because with these paragons of virtue pushing to lift limits on ethanol, one proposed piece of legislation calls for increasing it to 40%. And the fact that petroleum companies are, if anything, eager to admit that they're using ethanol reserves that are probably saturated already. My crystal ball, though cracked and cloudy though it may be, portends trouble ahead. Now add into this witch's brew the grand complication of money and politics, and it's anybody's guess as to how effectively the oil lobby will stifle rational, science-based dialogue. Let's just hope that some senator who's being chauffeured to a rally breaks down in a really bad part of town because of bad gas. That'll get him thinking.